Joe Biden saying the window has closed for mounting a successful campaign for the presidency of the United States. Translation, he is not running. Let's get straight to senior political editor Steve Chaggaris and our congressional correspondent Nancy Cordes on Capitol Hill. Steve, first to you. What did you make of the vice president's comments? I thought, as John said, it sounded like a stump speech, but we know that he's not running.
Yeah, it was. It was. If you didn't know that he was saying no at the beginning, you would have listened to this and said, "Well, geez, maybe this guy's running for president." That's what it sounded like to me. But you know, it was clearly thought out. He has a lot to offer. At least he's saying he has a lot to offer to the debate moving forward, and he's not going to be invisible. He's going to be a person over the next 15 months while he's in office, and he wants to be heard. And so I think you heard him lay out a lot of that there.
Or an end to partisanship, saying that this is petty. He said that it sort of is not in keeping in character with who we are as a nation. But you there on the Hill, you know that it's going to be an uphill battle for these Democratic nominees.
And he was actually laying down a marker for them in that speech, saying, do not try to run away from this president. You should be running on the basis of what this president has done. That's certainly what he would have done as vice president. And he's sending a message in particular to Hillary Clinton, who has praised the president repeatedly out on the campaign trail, but has tried to create some distance from him as well on key issues like this Asian trade deal that the administration just negotiated, or on Syria. She has been critical. She has gotten under the president's skin a bit, but clearly the Clinton campaign feels that they need to do this to position her better to win over independents in a general election. Vice President Biden made it clear today he is going to be keeping tabs on her and the other Democratic candidates. He said he is not going to be silent. He is going to speak out clearly and forcefully if he feels that the president's vision isn't being repeated by the people who want to replace him.
Let's, Steve and Nancy, stand by. Let's bring in Major Garrett, who broke the news that the vice president would not be seeking the nomination for the presidency of the United States. Major, to Nancy's point, the vice president, in a way, he did take a subtle jab again at Secretary Clinton, but he also said that when it comes to the Obama administration, he was going to, quote, protect the record.
Yes, and there really was no other room for Vice President Biden to say anything other than that. I mean, structurally, think about it. He's not running for the presidency. He's announcing to Hillary Clinton, I'm not going to be a challenger, but I want the Democratic Party to appreciate and follow this agenda and this record of this president that I have so faithfully served. Really, there was very little other rhetorical space for Joe Biden to occupy. And it is worth pointing out that because he is now not going to be a candidate, however forcefully he speaks, the conversation on the campaign trail will be between the announced candidates. Vice President Biden may weigh in from the sidelines, but the key word there is sidelines. That's where he has put himself now. Because as someone who is not the sitting vice president seeking the Democratic nomination, he will have only tangential impact on the debate that's going to go on in early primary and caucus states. That debate stage is now left literally to Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, and the remaining Democrats seeking the nomination. And the one other thing I would just point out about the atmospherics here at the Rose Garden, we got about 4.5 minutes notice that this was going to happen. I mean, this was a scramble like you cannot believe. The vice president either made this decision somewhat abruptly or kept it in abeyance to have the maximum element of surprise. And the people that you saw in the wide shot here in the Rose Garden were all the people who have worked the longest in this White House for President Obama and alongside Vice President Biden. And I can tell you it was a very quiet, somber mood, and there were some tears. There was a sense that this man, Vice President Biden, has served this administration well, might well have been a good candidate, might possibly have even been a decent president, but that he was calling it quits now was something that struck many here who had worked alongside him for a very long time as a moment that was a bit somber, and they had a very quiet, contemplative attitude about themselves as they listened to the vice president.
Certainly, Major. It sounded to me as I was listening to the vice president, this was a man sort of, although he was very forceful about what he was going to do to protect the Obama legacy, it did sound as if he was sort of riding off into the sunset. Nancy, I want to ask you, I know this has just happened, but I know things move very quickly in Washington. Have you heard at all anything, any emails from the Hillary Clinton camp or even perhaps Bernie Sanders?
You know, I started emailing them as soon as he started speaking, and I said, do you have any reaction? And one person at the campaign wrote back to me and said, he's still speaking. In other words, hold your horses. We haven't even had a chance to hear everything that he has to say yet. So I do expect that there will be a very gracious statement coming from Hillary Clinton herself, and then perhaps aides weighing in behind the scenes saying that, you know, he was never going to be able to mount the kind of organization that could pose a credible threat to Hillary Clinton. I do want to say that the people who are going to be most disappointed by the announcement we just heard will be the organizers of the Draft Biden movement. These are supporters, some past advisors all around the country who really mobilized to try to urge him to get into the race. Very quickly, they set up, they claimed in all 50 states, they were trying to create a sort of shadow campaign in waiting in case he did decide to jump in so he wouldn't be starting from scratch. And we've just gotten a statement from the executive director of Draft Biden, Will Pierce, who says, we are so grateful for the gigantic outpouring of support from hundreds of thousands of Americans around the country in our effort to encourage the vice president to run. While the vice president has decided not to run, we know that over the next year he will stand up for all Americans and articulate a vision for America's future that will leave no one behind.
That from the folks that wanted to see Vice President Biden run for president. Major, back to you. You know, this sounded to me, and I think a lot of people felt that the vice president was essentially delivering this stump speech. I wonder, for those of you in the White House press corps, were you sort of looking at yourselves, and as Steve pointed out, if you didn't catch the very, very top of his comments, it did sound like a stump speech, and he did take that subtle jab again at Hillary Clinton, who during the Democratic debate said, or it implied, that the Republicans were her enemy, and the vice president saying that he wanted to end partisan politics, calling it mean-spirited and petty. The Republicans are the opposition. What did you make of that?
So 3 quick observations, and I think Steve and Nancy would agree with me on this. Rarely are politicians more eloquent than when they are getting out of a race, meaning a race that they've been in and they've lost, or they make a decision not to get into a race, because there is a moment of clarity that comes to them, and they speak with a little bit more rhetorical passion and credibility. I think that was absolutely true of what the vice president said. Point number 2. Joe Biden is not riding off into the sunset. He will remain the president's vice president, obviously, but secondarily, he will be, and as always has been, a crucial negotiator on behalf of this White House on Capitol Hill. And there's a lot of business to take care of that will be very sensitive, hard to work out, and I guarantee you Joe Biden is going to be one of those people having phone conversations or face-to-face meetings with Republicans who are controlling the legislative agenda in the House and Senate. And the third point is, I would say most of what you heard this morning on the West Coast, was what Biden says about the economy generally. I spend a lot of my time listening to Joe Biden speak. It's part of my occupation. And all of that stuff about the middle class, about the income inequality, and partisanship getting in the way of that, big money in politics getting in the way of reconciling those things, Washington being unable to work, that is part and parcel of what Joe Biden often talks about when he addresses the economy, politics, and what's wrong in Washington. And if you hear some noise off to my right, that is Marine One landing here on the South Lawn momentarily because the president's heading to West Virginia. So if I'm getting drowned out, you can blame Marine One.
Major Garrett at the White House. Major broke the story just minutes before the vice president started talking. Major, we thank you. Steve, to you, I wonder if, and we'll probably never know this until the books are written about this election campaign, and I'm sure there will be a lot of books written about it, but was the vice president and his camp looking at sort of the tea leaves, reading the tea leaves there? He was polling a distant third behind Hillary Clinton and Senator Sanders in key states. Or will we find out at some point that there was some pressure, and we don't know from where, but what's your take?
I think it's the former. I think you really look at the last week of this campaign, and you saw what happened at the Democratic debate last week. Hillary Clinton having a great performance, Bernie Sanders really selling himself to his supporters. And coming out of that debate, I think there was a feeling that Democrats looked at what was on stage, at least in the form of Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, and were content with what they had. And then you saw polling then in the week following that basically saw Biden's numbers going down, and the question being asked, should he run? And Democrats sort of suggesting, you know, we're not that interested in him running. And so I think all that adds up to Biden looking at this and saying, okay, well, there's no groundswell. And then you add to that the fact that he literally has done nothing to set up any kind of presidential campaign. And that would have been in and of itself a major challenge. And so all of that added up. I think he would have had to have the draft Biden movement would have to be really a nationwide groundswell of people saying we really are not happy with Hillary Clinton, we're really not happy with Bernie Sanders, and Joe Biden must get in order to save the Democratic Party, and that just didn't happen.
Nancy, final question, I guess, to you. I'm curious. Also, the Vice President again pointing out that he intends to fight for the Obama administration, the record of the Obama administration. He said he wants to protect that record. I wonder for the Hillary Clinton camp, who in some instances have come out and distanced themselves from President Obama, for example, on the no-fly zone in Syria, on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Is that sort of still a bee in their bonnet, something that they're going to have to at least address?
Sure, because there are many Democrats, for example, who feel that Hillary Clinton should not have broken with the president on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. They thought that it was a bad decision strategically because, for one, she's on record so many times as Secretary of State in favor of it, and two, it's something that a lot of people in the country aren't necessarily focused on, and so she breaks with the president, contradicts herself, but doesn't get a huge boost from it. So it is a warning that she will have to think about that going forward, how often she does break with the president. For the most part, she hasn't. When you listen to her stump speech, she goes out there and says that President Obama has been a fantastic president for the economy, that he brought the nation back from the brink, that her husband did the same, and talking about how the nation seems to do better under Democratic presidents. So she certainly doesn't go out there on the campaign trail and slam the current president. She worked for him for 4 years. But it is a reminder that she will have to be careful. And I think, the vice president, as he was considering this decision, I think in the end, he knew that in order to get in and run credibly, Hillary Clinton was going to have to take a precipitous fall. She was leading him in the polls by something like 35 points. And really the only way that that was going to happen is if he were willing to take her down in order to see his poll numbers rise. And I just don't think that would have been in his character. And I just don't know that he or anyone else around him really had the stomach for that.
Nancy Cordes there on Capitol Hill, Steve Chaggaris in Washington, thank you very much, both of you, for your insights. We appreciate it. If you're just joining us, the news, Vice President Biden will not seek the nomination for a 2016 presidential bid. He announced that just moments ago at the Rose Garden. This ends months of speculation about whether Vice President would step up to the challenge of trying to take on Hillary Clinton and, to a lesser extent, Bernie Sanders. The Vice President saying today that the window has closed. We're going to take a quick break. This is CBSN, always on.